This is a church, and you've got pastors and elders. Right? And then you have home fellowship leaders, HFL, and you should have 8 or 10 of those in a church, with an assistant home fellowship leader. Okay, what's going on is you are helping the elders and pastors care for the sheep. You're part of the care. And at the same time, you're training up an assistant home fellowship leader. After a while, what's supposed to happen, especially with you guys who think that you may be called to become a pastor, your home fellowship leader, or your home fellowship, ought to split. And then your assistant home fellowship leader goes into a home group, and then you go to a home group. And the guy that your assistant home fellowship leader has been discipling goes with him. He becomes a home fellowship leader, and he now has an assistant that he's been training. You go over here, and you have another assistant. So now you have 2. And eventually you should probably have about 3 out of that. This is our training program for pastors. Okay? We suppose a guy and his wife who could take care of one other man and help him take care of another man to the point that they can take care of others, because the church is about giving care one to another. And so by the time you get this far, this guy right here has the skills that are necessary to pastor. Okay? Pastoring, it's shepherding. It is caring for the sheep. And so a church will be built within the church. And they can continue to function for a while, but then they'll be planted out. And then each of these people guys would all have home fellowships. So, you've got 40 or 50 people there, and you'd have all the different giftings that were necessary for a body to function. And at the right time, you'll send it on out. We keep pressing for a plant because this church is growing. We're not going to plant a church until this happens, because we love the guys that are called to be pastors. And we don't want them to be put out there before they are able to do this. Because if you're unable to disciple people to care for others, then you have to revert to building an organizational church. And we just don't want to do that. We don't want the kind of church where you have a great teacher standing up front and then you hire people to run programs. We want to produce pastors who know how to get into people's lives, love them, care for them, and cultivate them. Does that make sense? And I'm the most anxious person in the world, so I'm always trying to press past this. But from day one, this has been what God has spoken to us, and we're going to stick with it. And if we get off, you people be sure and grab us and drag us down and say, you're dumb. All right? So that's sort of the model, the vision. Let me go to, I believe it's chapter 7. It's on page 45. Yes, chapter 7. So this is especially geared today toward bringing some new people in that would be becoming assistant home fellowship leaders. Okay? And so look at 1 Timothy 3, 6 through 7. It's on page 45. He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. On the next page, you'll see that Exodus 18, 17 through 22 ends. And what Moses' father-in-law has asked him to do or advised him to do is find men to help care for the flock. And he says that they should be able men who fear God. Able men who fear God. Ability and character. Guys who can do the job, but they do the job in the fear of the Lord. And so one of the things that we want to make sure as we're trying to invite people into this circle here in Kentucky is, number one, that you have the ability, but that we're cultivating your ability, that we're training you and helping you develop those skills. But secondly, we also want to be aware of your personal relationship with the Lord, your character, your discipline, those kinds of things. So it has to be both. It's not one or the other. It's both. And so the caution is, if you see a gifted person, somebody who's really good with people, or somebody who can attract others, or people who can get close, but they have a character problem, that would be considered a novice. And it says that they will fall into the snare of the devil. Now, some of you people may know what that means. I don't. I kind of think a couple of things it could mean. It means they could become just like the devil and think, I'm pretty good here. Or the devil will snare them by letting them think they're pretty good here. One way or the other, it's not good. And it ends up in them drawing people to themselves. That's the problem with putting a novice in, is that they will draw people to themselves. They want the glory, which means rather than being able to disciple them to the Lord, you will hear them quote your name more than Jesus. Somewhat like the lady who prayed in the name of her husband, rather than the name of the Lord. Sorry, Chad, while you were out, I called on you to pray when you were here, so I asked her if Sheena could pray in your place. She didn't say in the name of Chad, but she said in the place of Chad. I thought that was fun. But serious business, we all know each other, we all love each other, and most of us are past our ego needs. But most of the people coming in here aren't past their ego needs. And it plays out in a couple of ways. Someone who can be domineering and get people to do what they want to do, or people who are endearing and can endear people to themselves. But at the very center of it is their own independence and their own glory. And so as you look for new people to bring in, you have got to qualify them both with ability and that they fear God. Okay? So one other thing that I'll point out, they are going to, here's their responsibilities. They're going to feed the sheep, verse 47, oversee the sheep, and it's going to be just out of servanthood, not out of a need. And then you come to the big list on page 50. I think this is a pretty old manual. I would say this is, from the New International Version. But it's a list of things that you would want to be aware of. So if you've got a young man that you're bringing in and you're wanting him to become your assistant, he doesn't have to be 100% perfect in all of these. None of us are 100% mature in all of these. But this list needs to be before you as you're considering a young man. Does that make sense? So, home fellowship leaders, work diligently to find an assistant and find a second assistant as quick as you can and get them involved in training to care for other people. Now, ladies, turn to the last chapter, chapter 10. And you can keep your finger there if you want to. In chapter 7. page 65, the roles unique to women. When we are not egalitarian, we will never plant a church and ordain women as pastors or elders. We don't think that that's the unpardonable sin. It's interesting, some of our primary teaching on relationship came from about a 25-year-old black lady. I got saved when a woman was preaching. So I hope God can work through women, even if they're in places that they might not always be. But we highly esteem the specific role of women. And just like you have this list on page 50 for men, you can find a list for women that will become godly women of character. And so we haven't amassed a complete, exhaustive list, but we've pulled out some of the things that we think are most important. So just like we would want a young man before he would become an assistant home fellowship leader to do the certain things that are listed there in Timothy and Titus that you can read on page 50, we've pulled out some things that we would like our young women to do first. I think sometimes young women are hardest because a lot of times women get where they are by their ability or their charm. Okay? And a lot of times you'll have one of these girls hit the body that's, Susie Smiley face, and all of a sudden she's got everybody coming over to her house, and, she can throw a big party, and she kind of makes a place for herself. That is just the same as putting a novice in, and they fall into the snare. And so what we look for are women who are able to come to the Bible and read what a real woman is supposed to be. And so what you'll find in chapter 10 is not rules for becoming a leader in the church. It's, if you're going to be trusted as one of our primary women in this church that's our go-to lady, this is going to be in your life first. You're not going to get there because you can, teach women, or because you sing pretty, or you know how to wiggle when you walk, or whatever it is. And so, let me make this clear. We're not saying that you're limited to this. We're saying until you do this, you're limited to it. And it's out of this kind of basic lifestyle, just like our young men, until they're faithful in what a man is supposed to be. Well, we don't want them trying to lead stuff. Does that make sense? And so, just for you, we wrote this chapter. I know you all have felt really bad, and we feel like the church is chauvinistic anyway, so we wanted to liberate our women by giving you a list just like the men have. I know, you can't figure out if I'm trying to be funny or not. Okay, so we have the vision, This is the church. If you look at chapter 2, it talks about the church. What is the church? That is a very debatable topic. And if you get into the big, broad debate like some of these brainiacs can do, you'll find out that it's defined in different ways. The universal church is everybody that's dead, everybody that's here, and everybody that's going to be here. Or, the church is full of sinners and saints, or a lot of different things. I can't answer those questions, but we do know a few things that the church is supposed to be. And you, of all people, as leaders, need to understand what church is. So flip over to that chapter real quick. And when we go through this chapter, what we're trying to do is, first of all, help people understand the centrality and the importance of church as God defines church. How central it is, and how universal it is. It covers everything in the work of the kingdom. It is the mechanism by which God brings his kingdom into the earth. And so you need to learn what church is, and you need to learn to love the church. Christ loved what? He gave himself for the church. And in some way, you have got to come to the place that you realize, I am going to give my life for the church. I forsake my mother. I forsake my father. I forsake my job. And the way you forsake your mother, father, your wife, and your job for the church is rather than living for them, if they're going to be attached to you, you pull them into your service for the church. Does that make sense? A lot of people have trouble when you come to you forsake your mother and father. You forsake your job. How do you do that? You don't live for them. You let them know that you're living for the church. And then you invite them to live with you for the church. Your job doesn't rule you. Your job serves you as you serve the church. That has got to become your understanding of life. I have forsaken everything for Christ, and I love what he loves, the people of God. And then how the churches function or structured, as you go through here, it will go over some of our teachings, and we'll go into more detail. But here's the second thing. First, you've got to love it like Christ loved it. It's got to be the central love of your life with him. See, not apart from him, but with him. You and he join together loving the church. That gives you the right priority. Being joined with him, one with him. You and he together, by the Spirit, love the church. All right? Then, you've got to understand the church not as LCF, TCF, First Baptist, Sunday morning meeting, but you have to see the church exactly like what I'm looking at right now. You've got to see the church as people and their lives and their relationship with each other. The church is built as we learn to live together. It's not about numbers. It's not about how beautiful the program is. It is how we honestly love each other and pour our lives with each other. That's what Christ came to establish, is a people who love each other like he loves the church. Does that make sense? And that's got to be your message. That's got to be deep inside of you if you're going to help lead in the work that God's doing in the earth right now, which is establishing his church, a people joined together. And so, I love that topic, so I'll move on. Then, home fellowship leaders, okay? As you, chapter 1, page 1, as you are bringing people into training, you have got to know this. They may not know it, but you've got to know it. A lot of times, I don't know how many of y'all remember when you were young and you were given responsibility. There's something about responsibility when you get it, it's self-focusing. Or it makes you focus on yourself. Well, I'm going to do this. And you're worried about the presentation, you're worried about how it goes, but you're really not worried about the presentation, you're not worried about how it goes. You're worried about how you are going to do. Does that make sense? No? I guess I was one of the selfish little proud, brat that never got into any kind of leadership. Well, anyway, let me tell you about it. He said sarcastically, Dan. It's a sarcastic. Got that? That was a sarcasm. I'm going to build this new philosophy called and I'm going to be a sarcast. Oh yeah, but I haven't defined the term yet. You can help me with it. Which, I make fun of Dan, but I really appreciate both Dan and Chad. And if I ever make fun of them for their intelligence, But the reality is what we know is this person is going to meet God. Okay? If you are bringing somebody into leadership, you know the purpose is their Father wants to meet with them on a new level. And you've got to know that. It can't be just about getting the job done, able, but it's got to be the fear of God as well. And you have to care about that person. Home fellowship leader, primary woman. If you're bringing a younger woman or a young woman, you have got to be concerned not about the work, but you've got to understand you're bringing this person into the work because it's the next thing they need to do to meet God. And so there's some specific lessons that they will be learning, and you need to know that. And you can't get caught on how are they doing, how they frustrate you, their lack of responsibility or their overbearingness. You have got to tune into they are put into a whole new frying pan, and the heat is getting turned up, and it's going to reveal some things. And when those things happen, now as a home fellowship leader training this person, I am now able to address something in their life. If they're owning a disciple, which they shouldn't, you have an opportunity to help them understand that the Father wants to relate to them as a steward, not as a master. If they are proud or arrogant, then in their relationship to their disciple, if they think they are so far ahead that they can dominate this person, they need to meet the Father. Okay? It's not just about fixing them or making them productive. It's helping them take that next step that comes when you get that responsibility of caring for others. All right, let me say it again. Home fellowship leaders, you're the one. You are the person that has got to use this time in their life to help them learn the lessons that are in chapter 1. If you're bringing somebody into this, you should go over and over and over chapter 1 and make sure that you're walking in a desire to know God through this and that you're using it to help them know God. That's not all there is. There's a vision. There's something that's going to come out of it. There's other things. But if they're not meeting God, if your relationship to them and training them is not opening up new doors to know God better, then we're becoming an organization again. It has a great home group training program, which we don't want. We are life on life, helping people know God. Chapter 2, I will not even mention because, I will only mention because you all should have that memorized. It talks about as you come to know the Father, you understand what He values. And I'll just say this. A person's life reflects what he or she values. Some people value comfort. Some people value tidiness. Some people value freedom. But whatever you value, it permeates your house, your car, your family, the way you do everything. God has things that He values, and to the degree that we understand His values, we will build His house, and His house will look like Him. Does that make sense? He is not as concerned about some things as we are, and He's more concerned about some things than we are. And what you get in church split is when two groups get concerned about things and they can't find out what God's concerned about, and they fight. There is a God. You heard it here. There is a God. He is a true being. He exists. He has character. He has nature, and he is who he is. And our job is to get to know him and what he values and how he lives and conform ourselves to his house. And as we do that, then we become a reflection of his house. That's what we're doing, okay? All right. Then, in chapter 4, it talks about the disciple model. This is the bread and butter of our church, right here. It's the bread and butter of the kingdom. Jesus came and he built a church. And then he told them to go and build more churches. But we know it better by he came and made disciples and told them to go make more disciples. He came, chose 12 people, poured himself into them, and told them to do the same. Okay? One of the things I want to point out, and this is the hardest thing, and I'm not exactly sure if we'll ever master it, but we've got to make sure that we fight this tendency toward people thinking, I am going to make a disciple. But we are going to make disciples. He said, y'all go, and y'all make disciples, and y'all baptize them. See? Y'all do it. And it's very easy for us to take ownership of another person, or for that to happen. And so, I don't need a person to esteem me. I have responsibility as a home fellowship leader to make sure this person is cared for. And there are some people in the body that are very good at that. Instead of feeling like I am the all in all to this person, they realize, I know where everything is, and I'm going to show them how to find it. And that's really our job as a home fellowship leader. There's some primary things that we do. Accountability, and basically accountability with them to help them be faithful to the places they need to be. So they have a pastor, they have a fellowship leader, they have elders, they have deacons, they have somebody who's teaching a foundations class. We have all these people who are working together. And we don't shape people to our personality. But our church has the personality of Christ. And so we want to, in a balanced way, bring people into a relationship with the church. And so your job is, first of all, in discipling, well, let me just say this. The first thing you've got to do is help them have a true and honest relationship with Jesus. Major on that in the beginning. Don't worry about cleaning them up. I think a lot of times, especially with our younger disciples, somebody comes in and there's an area of their life that's not quite the way we do it, the way we date, the way we dress, or the way we don't dress, and ways in which we don't dress, those things. That's not the most important thing when a person comes in. Don't get your panties in a wad over somebody who keeps kind of dribbling out into the things that the world does. And I'm not talking about blatant sin. I mean, if somebody's, partaking in bona fide biblical sin, that's a different topic. I'm talking about these things that are unique to our church, right? Don't get all frustrated about that. I think a lot of times, like I said, younger people have emphasized that, and rather than embracing people to see the goodness in that, we beat them in the head with the law, and they don't have the grace of the relationship with Jesus for that to happen. Okay? Now, after a couple of years, they're still pressing those limits. You know they've got a heart problem. But that's the skill in discipling, is you've got to be able to figure out when it goes from just learning, what is righteous and holy, and a real attitude of I'm going to do my own thing. So as you're bringing these new disciples in, assistant home fellowship leaders, make sure you're helping them not major on minors, but you're really cultivating this relationship with Jesus. You do that in a couple of ways. We have 2 classes. One is a foundations class, which Chad teaches, and you need to make sure they know that material. You don't need to make sure they go to class. You don't need to make sure they do their manual. You need to make sure they understand what a relationship with Jesus is. And then the next section is, in the Foundations Manual, is reading and praying and worshiping God. So, as a person comes into the church, your primary goal is to help them know their relationship to God and build it through prayer and worship. All right? And reading of the Word. It's your job to take them to places they need to be. All right? Because the third part that they will learn is the church. They don't understand the church like you do. And I think we expect people to have the same value of the church that we have. And they, to them, life has been a series of choices. And so when they come to the church, they go, oh, they're having this program and they're having that program. And we kind of think, why didn't they go? Well, they didn't want to. And they don't know that they need to, so they didn't go. So you shouldn't get upset. You should get upset with yourself because you didn't go and say, hey, I'm going and I'm going to take you with me. And so I think we expect sometimes out of disciples things that they don't have the foundation for. So you want to emphasize praying, reading your Bible, and getting to know God. And then when they have that foundation of grace in their life and they're really connected, then they can begin to learn about the responsibility they have. Does that make sense? And again, I hope you're writing this down because it's not in the manual. I think that's where sometimes we go wrong. Is we expect them to know what we know, and we expect after we say it once for them to understand it. They have got to know Jesus, know how to pray, and know how to read their Bible before they will begin to understand what the church is as we understand it. And so your responsibility as a person who's discipling them is to help them cultivate their life in Jesus by exposing them to home group, church, how to study the Bible, how to pray, plus the foundations class. And then you have got to be their connection to the church. You've got to connect them where they need to connect. You've got to get them where they need to go. They may not even know the mailing list yet, the email list. Or they may not check. Or they may not understand it when it comes. They may not understand CFEs yet. And so you just got to help them figure it out. Does that make sense? So it's a discipling model. Chapter 5 is the way we do evangelism. And again, I'm certainly not teaching on these topics. I'm just drawing your attention to some important points and maybe a couple of things that aren't in the manual. But again, this is the context of use home fellowship leaders bringing other people in to lead with you. All right, reaching the lost. Notice we call it reaching the lost and not evangelism. There was a reason for that because a lot of people have this automatic view of what evangelism is. I really appreciate where Stephen is. He labored over this whole idea of evangelism. How do you do it? And I was talking to him the other day, and he was describing to me the way he's decided is the best way to do it. And I said, well, that's in the manual. He said, I know. And so, I'm talking to home fellowship leaders who are bringing new leaders in. Now we're talking about evangelism. If I was teaching a class on evangelism, I would say something else. But home fellowship leaders, it is up to you to cultivate evangelism in your home group as we describe it in this chapter. You've got to help your people understand that we together as a team reach one other person. And you have got to set up events, you've got to participate with the broader church, and you have got to personally, one-on-one with the people in your group, help them understand how this works. Because still to this day, I think a lot of people, when a new person walks into the church, they don't realize that the church is reaching this person. They say, Bobby Joe is good at evangelism. I'm not. Okay, Bobby Joe may be good at evangelism, and you may not be. But we're all just as good as the other person at reaching the lost. Because there's a dynamic of church life that is the draw to the lost. Father, I pray that they may be one so the world may believe that thou hast sent me. One person cannot demonstrate the oneness of two people. It is our life together, and it is our love to that person. And so when a person comes into home fellowship, we all need to know our part. But again, home fellowship leaders, you're the one who has to develop your way of doing that as a team. You've got to look at your team and see how you all do it best. And you've got to create that opportunity. I think there's a section in here, page 32, and I'm just underlining a few things that I think get lost. God works through strategy. God works through strategy. It doesn't say he only works through strategy. You know, woman at the well. You show up, there she is. You know, serendipitous, providential, whatever you want to call it. It just happens in the course of the day. But you can also determine that you're going to do evangelism in a certain way. You can reach the lost in a certain way. And God works there too. I think probably when we wrote this years ago, it was back when probably, you know, somebody in the church was probably saying, well, I just don't think you ought to do it that way. It ought to be natural. It ought to be just in the course of life. And so I was probably mad when I wrote this chapter. God works through strategy too. It's a great chapter on evangelism. And leaders, you should read back through it, and then you should ask yourself, how am I making this happen to people in my home group? Okay? Follow up. Home fellowship leader. You have an assistant that you're training. Sit down and go through this, and then make sure you follow this program with them on the first person they care for. Okay, they may not do it this way for the rest of their life, but, and listen real close, if you will read this chapter and you will do what it says, it will create a pattern in your life that will be most healthy for the people you're going to bring in the future. Chad talked about responsibility at the men's meeting this morning. And I think a lot of times, we don't know how to be responsible to a new believer. They come, we're excited, we have them over to eat, we touch base with them, we get them enrolled in a class. 7, 8 weeks later, we're kind of busy, and we may not get with them for a couple of weeks. How would that work with a newborn baby? I'm telling you, newborn Christians, or people just coming into discipleship, are a lot like newborn babies. And I've seen it happen over and over and over. Really excited. Hey, this person I've been sharing with them, and they came to church, and oh, hey, you know, they want to get baptized. And 6, 8 weeks later, I'm at a men's meeting, and I say, where's Carl? I don't know. Maybe he didn't know about the meeting. I'm like, what? If he didn't know, that's your fault. And so if you'll just read this chapter, it'll show you week by week for the first 15 weeks or so what you need to be doing, and you need to do it faithfully. Now, in the future, you may do it better than this. You may do it a little different than this. But what this will work into you is, I need to see what needs to happen for the next 15 weeks and be faithful every week to that. I think that's one of Dan's strengths in discipling. He is logical, methodical, and consistent. sometimes boring, but boring consistent is better than exciting. You know, the tortoise always wins the race. And it's amazing how many people call themselves evangelists and jump around and do all this stuff, and 10 years later, they're really the disciples as a result of that. And you've got these plotters who have 2 or 3 people that are plodding along with them now. And so I would just encourage you to read that. Make yourself do it with somebody, with your assistant fellowship leader. All right? We talked about qualifying leadership. Then, if you'll look at chapter 8, and we're getting close to finished here. Chapter 8, the responsibility of leadership. Look at the first responsibility. Love the sheep. The most important thing in bringing somebody on your team is that you love them first. You honestly love them. You're not trying to build a home group, but you're trying to become a man of love, a woman of love, and that you really love them. And if you don't love your people, be honest with yourself and get with some of the guys and gals here and say, hey, you know, I really don't love people. People irritate me, and I'm just doing it because I don't know why I'm doing it. So love people, and then help people love other people. Let them realize, no, you're not moving into leadership. You're moving into care for others. That doesn't mean taking care of other people. Well, it means that, but you really care about other people. You love them, and you want them to do well. And that's the first responsibility of leadership, is to love the sheep and to care for them, to really want to see them do well. Okay? Second thing, key initiated relationship. Again, is Brenda here? Don't tell them home to talk about it, don't please. But you can't get frustrated with people because they don't do what you think they ought to do. Keep your mouth quiet, please. Pretty please. He initiated the relationship. For God so loved the world that He gave. He humbled Himself and became shaped and formed. Somebody quote it for me. Anybody get that Philippians verse?
Humbled up and became obedient.
The form of a man. What's the one?
Being found in
Found in the form of a man, yeah. He took on a human body. He became a man. It doesn't register. I mean, we've never been gods, so we don't know what it's like to take on man, become a man. But He did that. And He left heaven and went to a place that was fallen. And He sought out His disciples. And it says that I came to seek and to save the lost. And so we can't, again, I think we want a maturity out of people that we probably didn't have for years and may not even have yet. And so we've got to love them, and you've got to understand, if you love them, you will seek them out. You will go where they are. You will be with them. You won't try to get them to conform to your preferences. Now, your lifestyle that's godly and your faithfulness to the places you need to be to grow, yes. But this hangout, time that you're just with them, you have got to seek them out, and don't get frustrated and don't demand something out of them. You lay down your life for them. And if you're going to be a leader, you just got to figure that out. Jesus never really figured it out. He just always knew it. That was a theological statement. And, page 59. turn to page 64, the last page of that chapter. And we're almost finished. I'm wrong, it's on page 59. It's the first page. There's two lists. You can look at that last list. You'll need to do that. So, if you are getting to train a new home fellowship leader, what are you trying to, what's the most important thing with training a new home fellowship leader? Anybody guess? Pardon me? Schedule? Their relationship with God. The most important thing is that you're helping them grow in God. You're bringing them into this because you want them to know God. Sorry, Eric, it's a trick question. Does that make sense? Always, in everything, you're wanting them to know God. And in every chapter, it looks like there's a different answer. But it's not. They're getting to know God. And so when we say, hold them to this schedule, all right, is that so the meeting will go well? Yes. But it's so they can meet God. How do they meet God? By keeping a schedule. Pardon me? They die to their way. Exactly. And so if you'll look at the schedule, it says open with 15 to 30 minutes of worship. Follow this with 15 to 30 minutes of prayer. Spend the following 10 minutes discussing the evangelism focus. Next, a specific teaching should be presented for 15 to 30 minutes, and then finish by sharing the vision. Okay? All of these things need to be a part of what's going on with your home fellowship. Does that make sense? But here's the deal. The reason you need to have your assistant home fellowship leader lead this way is because we all live out of our personality. And we are most comfortable, unless we're teenagers, with ourselves. Okay? And so we like the way we do things. And so, if you're in charge of a meeting, and leaders, if I were you, I would talk to the people in my home group and I would say, do you think I need to go by this a little bit better? Because you may be boring them there. You know, you may be wearing them out and not knowing. You may be killing them. But as you work through here, there's times of prayer, there's times of worship, there's times of talking about evangelism, and there's times of getting in the Word. All of those things which bring health to us. But everybody out of their personality usually likes one thing more than the other. Some people like fellowship. So they'll talk for 35, 40 minutes every meeting. And frankly, I get bored with most of those conversations. When I'm in a meeting where they're just chit-chatting about, you know, how many fleas the dog had, you know, I'm like, it kills me. But I need to be able to have those kind of conversations, right? Some people, they just like to worship. And so, if they're in charge of a meeting, if they're not held to a schedule, they'll worship for 45, 50 minutes. And just wear people out every time. And so what happens with a new home, and you need to be really keyed into this, and you should let them lead the meetings as much as you can before you split, so you can watch and see what they do. And after a year of running a meeting this way, you're going to find out something. If you don't stay on top of them, do they keep a balanced approach to the meeting, or do they gravitate toward what's easy for them? And while they're enjoying the meeting themselves, it's not really bringing life to everybody because they're experiencing it themselves rather than administrating the gifts and allowing the Spirit of God to do what He wants to do. Does Does that make sense? So how do they get to know God? Well, they realize that I like to worship. I like to teach. I like to fellowship. God's bigger than that. And God has a lot of giftings. And I need to meet God. And where it's hard for me to teach, where it's hard for me to submit to worship, notice I didn't say least worship, I need to do that because I can meet God there. And that's a part of God that I need to relate to. See, so you're not only protecting the flock by getting this person to follow this list, you're also helping them realize who they are in relationship to God and how God is bigger than who they are and how that He may want to minister out of other parts of Himself during the meeting that you lead and to be able to hear God in those ways. Does that make sense? This is so important because the worst thing is to set somebody free as a home fellowship leader and see that home fellowship die because they just talk people to death or sing people to death. Or it's funny to say pray people to death or whatever. And it's not that those things are bad, it's just that they don't get the rest of the ministry that they need because it's just your personality coming through. Does that make sense? Okay, I think that's most of the chapters. I think we touched on all of them. And so, home fellowship, you need to have some assistants that you're trying to get to lead with you. And you need to get them to these trainings we're going to do in the next few months for these new guys coming on. Who here is being trained as an assistant